I'd like to bring in our international affairs editor, Philip Tell. Philip, thanks so much for being with us. Is there any way out of this deadlock?
Well, for the moment, Sanam, it appears not, because neither side, neither the military-run interim government nor the protesters seem to be budging on their demands. The protesters, what they want is for these elections not to take place. And the military government is saying what we want is a strong turnout. And when you've got those two positions face to face, it doesn't look as though there's going to be much leeway either side. Now, what the protesters are angry about are the 5 candidates. Here they are. You can see there's 2 former prime ministers, 1 former culture minister, 1 former tourism minister, and the head of the El Mostarabal movement, who is a former member of the ruling FLN party. The protesters are saying, well, these elections are basically just for the election of someone to take the place of Abdelaziz Bouteflika from the same regime, and we're going to carry on with the same situation that we've been in since 1962. We want independent candidates to run. We want a new regime to take over Algeria. That is why they're angry about it. They're accusing the army and the government of just trying to preserve their jobs, their perks, their privileges, and to remain in office. On the other side, the government has criticised the European Parliament, which has come out this week to argue that the way they're handling this election, as you were just saying, with the clampdown against journalists, against members of civil society, against lawyers, against trade unionists, is totally out of order. And they've been joined in the last 24 hours by Amnesty International, which has also blown the whistle on what's going on in Algeria, saying that the government is being far too heavy-handed with what they're doing.
You mentioned briefly the government stance, Phil. Of course, they're saying that this election is a very important step towards democracy.
Well, they are saying that, and it is true that in Algerian society there are those who say, well, I'm going to vote anyway, because if the new government doesn't come up with the goods and do what they say they're going to do, then we'll be back in the street to protest again until they go. Others are saying, well, if we do vote, that's going to consolidate the government that's already in place and make them more legitimate, and that's what we don't want, because they're basically a government that should not still be there, and we want a freer election. The view from the government is that there's too much outside interference in this. There have been a lot of Twitter feeds this week about remarks by the Interior Minister who branded the protesters as puppets of colonialists, traitors, homosexuals and mercenaries. That doesn't help when you're trying to run an election campaign. Now, of course, if there's a strong turnout, that will consolidate the government. If there's a weak turnout, that will consolidate the protesters. So we'll see what happens next week on Thursday. But for the time being, it doesn't look as though after 42 weeks of protests since last February, which did result in the removal of Abdelaziz Bouteflika, we're any closer to some kind of consensus between the government on one side and the protesters on the other.
Philip Tell, thank you so much for that analysis ahead of Algeria's upcoming election, as we said, on December the 12th.